true unnerving new house horror stories. The air was thick with anticipation as Sam and Laura pulled into the driveway of their new home. After months of house hunting, they had found the perfect place, an old colonial tucked away in a quiet part of town. It was large, with gabled roofs and a sprawling garden, something out of a magazine spread. It needed some work, but it was theirs, and they were excited to begin their new life there. The previous owners had mentioned that the house had been on the market for a while, longer than one might expect for such a charming property. But Sam and Laura were not deterred. They attributed it to the house's age. Who could resist a project like this? As they stepped through the front door, the air seemed to hang in stillness, almost as if the house had been holding its breath for their arrival. The first few weeks passed in a blur of unpacking and minor renovations. Sam took pride in fixing the creaky floorboards, while Laura busied herself with painting the walls and making the space feel like home. It was during these mundane tasks that things began to feel off. It started with small things. Laura would often feel like she was being watched while she worked in the kitchen, a sensation that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She'd turn around, expecting to see Sam, but the room was always empty. At night, the house creaked and groaned in ways that seemed unnatural. At first, they wrote it off as the house settling. Old houses did that after all. But soon, the incidents became harder to explain. One evening, as Laura was brushing her teeth, she heard a faint whisper behind her. Startled, she turned, but there was no one there. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the plumbing. She shook it off, trying to convince herself it had been the wind, or perhaps her imagination. Yet deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The next morning, Sam mentioned that he had been having strange dreams. He described a recurring nightmare in which he would wake up in their bed, but the house around him was different. The walls were warped, and there was a constant sense of dread, as though something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. "I feel like there's something in the house," he confided one night as they sat in the living room sipping wine. "Something watching us." Laura wanted to dismiss his fears, but she had been feeling the same unsettling presence. Still, she told him it was just stress, that their minds were playing tricks on them. Then came the night when everything changed. It was a stormy evening, with heavy rain and wind rattling the windows. Sam had gone to bed early, but Laura stayed up to finish some work in her study. As she typed away on her laptop, the lights flickered, and the house was plunged into darkness. She sighed, reaching for the flashlight they kept on the desk. But as she did, she heard something. A soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "Sam?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Her heart pounded in her chest as the footsteps grew louder, moving toward her. She stood up, clutching the flashlight, and moved toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. She called out again, but the house remained eerily quiet. Slowly, she made her way upstairs to their bedroom, praying that Sam had somehow slept through the noise. But when she opened the door, she froze. Sam was there, lying in bed, but he wasn't alone. A figure stood at the foot of the bed, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, with an unnaturally thin frame and long, bony fingers that seemed to reach for Sam. The air around it was thick with a cold, oppressive energy. Laura could barely breathe. The figure turned its head slowly toward her, and she saw its face, a twisted, gaunt visage with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. She screamed, dropping the flashlight as she stumbled backward into the hallway. The lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. Laura rushed to Sam's side, shaking him awake. He sat up groggily, confused and disoriented. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "There was something in here," Laura stammered, her body trembling with fear. But Sam didn't believe her. He insisted that it had just been a nightmare, that she was letting the stress of the move get to her. But Laura knew what she had seen. The following days were unbearable. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and the strange occurrences intensified. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in the strangest of places. Doors would open and close on their own, and at night they could hear faint voices, whispers that seemed to echo through the walls. One evening, while Sam was out running errands, Laura decided to investigate the attic. They hadn't spent much time up there, but something about it felt off. As she climbed the narrow staircase, the temperature dropped noticeably. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself as she reached the top. The attic was dark and cluttered with old furniture and boxes left behind by previous owners. But there was something else, an old, ornate mirror covered in a thick layer of dust. Laura wiped the surface clean, revealing her reflection. For a moment she stared at herself, her breath fogging up the glass. But then, something changed. In the reflection, she saw movement behind her, a shadow, darker than the rest of the attic. Slowly, it crept closer, taking shape. It was the same figure she had seen in the bedroom, its hollow eyes fixed on her. She spun around, but the attic was empty. Panicking, she ran down the stairs and out of the house, waiting in the car until Sam returned. When he arrived, she broke down, telling him everything: the footsteps, the figure, the attic. That night, they decided to call a paranormal investigator. The investigator, a quiet man named Michael, arrived the next day. He moved through the house with a solemn expression, as though he could feel the weight of whatever was lurking within its walls. After a few hours, he sat them down and spoke in a low, grave tone. "There's something here," he said, "something old and angry. It's tied to this house, and it doesn't want you here." He explained that the house had a dark history. In the early 1900s, it had belonged to a man named Edward Hollis, a recluse who was rumored to dabble in dark rituals. His wife and children had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and shortly after, Edward was found dead in the attic, hanging from the rafters. Michael believed that Edward's spirit, twisted by his actions in life, was still in the house, and it had grown more powerful over the years. It fed on the energy of the living, and now that Sam and Laura had moved in, it was beginning to manifest more aggressively. "You need to leave," Michael warned. "This spirit won't stop until it drives you out, or worse." Sam and Laura didn't need to be told twice. They packed up their belongings that night and left the house behind, leaving the keys with their realtor. As they drove away, Laura glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the house grow smaller in the distance. For a moment, she thought she saw something in one of the upstairs windows, a dark figure watching them leave. They never went back. A few months later, the house was put back on the market. It was bought by a young couple eager to start their life together. They moved in on a bright, sunny day, full of hope and excitement. But as the sun set and the shadows grew long, the house settled once again, and the whispers began anew.